The mid-morning sun slanted through the cracked blinds of apartment 2B, casting tired light across Margot Winslow's kitchen table. She'd been awake since 5, watching the brown water stain on the ceiling grow with each thunderous shower from the upstairs neighbor. The eviction notice sat beside a pile of unpaid bills, 48 hours stamped in red across the top like a countdown to nowhere. Margot's fingers traced the rim of her coffee mug, now cold and half empty, like everything else in her life. The ancient Honda in the parking lot hadn't started in 3 days. Her boss at Valley Diner had forgotten her paycheck again, third time this month, and now the landlord had cornered her in the stairwell yesterday. His breath smelled of cigarettes and cheap bourbon. Pay by Friday or find somewhere else. His eyes lingering too long on the curve of her neck, suggesting there might be other arrangements they could make. Margot had hurried past, clutching her purse tighter, stomach churning with a familiar cocktail of rage and helplessness. 8-year-old Iris sat across the table, carefully spreading peanut butter on slightly stale bread, humming to herself. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail uniform, already on collar ironed crisp, despite everything else falling apart around them. She was making her own lunch again, too young to carry such responsibility, but too perceptive not to notice her mother's exhaustion. The phone rang, startling them both. An unknown number with a Manhattan area code. Margot hesitated, then answered, expecting another collection agency. The voice on the other end was polished, professional. Daniel Foster, attorney at law representing the estate of Theodore Castellano. Margot's uncle. Her estranged uncle. Her dead uncle, apparently. She barely remembered Uncle Theodore. A stern face at a family funeral when she was 12, maybe. The man on the phone was explaining something about inheritance, about property in Vermont, about coming to his office to discuss details. Margot almost laughed. She had a double shift at the diner, no car, and exactly $23 to her name. But Foster was insistent. This was important, life-changing, potentially. The estate would cover her transportation cost to the city. Iris looked up, peanut butter knife suspended midair, sensing the shift in her mother's energy. Margot hung up, mind racing through the impossibilities. An inheritance from family that had disowned her years ago when she'd chosen Mark, the aspiring musician with the charming smile and empty promises. The family had written her off completely after that disaster ended with divorce papers and a toddler. No help, no contact, nothing but silence for a decade. The cab Foster sent dropped them at a gleaming glass tower in Midtown the next morning. The elevator whisked them up 47 floors, Iris's eyes wide as she pressed her face against the glass, watching the city shrink beneath them. The Harrison and Foster reception area smelled of leather and money, two scents that had become increasingly unfamiliar in Margot's life. Daniel Foster stood as they entered his office, a tall man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and glasses that probably cost more than Margot's monthly rent. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, but not unkind. The office windows overlooked Central Park, the early autumn trees just beginning to turn gold and crimson. Iris settled into an oversized leather chair with a book from her backpack, while Foster opened a thick folder on his desk. Margot perched uncomfortably on the edge of her seat, hyper-aware of her waitress uniform beneath her only decent coat, the runs in her stockings hidden by tall boots she'd repaired with black nail polish. The explanation was surreal. Theodore Castellano, her father's brother, had died 3 months ago. No wife, no children. And despite the family's legendary estrangement from Margot after her unfortunate marriage decision, Theodore had apparently kept tabs on her life from a distance. According to Foster, Theodore had respected her refusal to come crawling back to the family after Mark left her determination to make it on her own. And so, in what Foster delicately suggested might be either genuine admiration or some final family joke, Theodore Castellano had left Margot his most problematic asset. Castellano Estate, a sprawling historic property in rural Vermont. The inheritance included the mansion, all its contents, and the surrounding 30 acres of land. Foster slid photographs across the desk. A massive stone structure loomed among overgrown trees, part castle, part Victorian nightmare. Ivy and moss claimed the walls. Many windows were broken or boarded. It looked like something from a Gothic novel, beautiful in its decay, but utterly uninhabitable. Margot laughed, a short, sharp sound. Was this the punchline? Leave the struggling single mother a crumbling money pit she couldn't possibly afford to maintain? Perfect. The family's final cruel joke. Foster's expression remained neutral as he outlined the details. The property had been abandoned for nearly 40 years. Theodore had purchased it from distant family members in the 1980s, but never lived there. Annual taxes were modest due to some historic preservation classification, and those were covered by a small trust for the next 3 years. After that, Margot would be responsible. She was about to refuse the inheritance outright when Foster placed something else on the desk. A heavy brass key ornately decorated with what appeared to be a compass rose pattern on the handle. Uncle Theodore had been quite specific. The key, the estate, and whatever it contained all belonged to Margot now. What about the rest of the family? The cousins who'd never missed an opportunity to remind Margot of her poor choices, surely they'd received the valuable assets, the liquid investments they'd been provided for elsewhere. Foster confirmed his tone, suggesting they'd been provided for quite generously elsewhere. Margot's portion was specifically the Castellano estate with all its problems and potential. That night, back in the apartment with its leaking ceiling and thin walls, Margot sat at the kitchen table staring at the heavy brass key. Iris had finally fallen asleep. Her math homework completed despite the shouting match between the couple upstairs and the thudding bass from the apartment next door. The photographs Foster had provided were spread before her. Despite the decay, there was undeniable grandeur to the place. Stone walls 3 feet thick, according to the documents. Craftsmanship from another era. Foster had mentioned that Castellano estate had been moved literally stone by stone from Scotland in the 1920s by her great-grandfather Victor Castellano, nearly bankrupting the family in what local papers had called Castellano's folly. A castle. An actual castle. Hers. But also a ruin, a money pit, a responsibility she couldn't possibly handle. The roof alone would cost more than she'd make in 5 years. The windows, the plumbing, the heating, if it even had heating. That was assuming the structure was sound, which seemed optimistic given the small trees growing from some of the towers in the photographs. The brass key caught the dim kitchen light, the compass rose pattern gleaming. North, south, east, west. Directions to what Margot traced the pattern with her fingertip, feeling something stir within her. Not hope exactly. More like curiosity. What had driven Theodore to buy this place and then never visit it? What was hidden within those moss-covered walls? A sudden crash from the apartment upstairs made Margot jump. Glass breaking, a woman crying, a man's angry shout. The same soundtrack that had played through the thin walls for months. Iris stirred in the bedroom, whimpering in her sleep. The decision formed in Margot's mind before she could talk herself out of it. They would go see this castle. Just for a weekend, just to look. Maybe to laugh at Uncle Theodore's final joke before signing the place over to the state or a historical society. Maybe to salvage something worth selling. Maybe just to breathe air that wasn't saturated with other people's misery. The following afternoon, while attempting to jumpstart the Honda with cables borrowed from her neighbor, Margot made a discovery that sent a chill through her despite the warm September sun. Rifling through the glove compartment for the vehicle registration, her fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the manual. It was yellowed with age, the creases worn thin from repeated folding and unfolding. A map fragment hand-drawn in faded ink showing what appeared to be part of a building's floor plan. In the corner, barely visible, was a family crest she recognized from the brass key, and scrolled across the top in spidery handwriting, "North will guide the way." The paper felt electric in her hands, as though charged with secrets. That evening, as Margot packed a small bag for their weekend trip, Iris sat cross-legged on her bed with colored pencils and a sketch pad. When Margot came to check on her progress, she froze in the doorway. On the paper, rendered with surprising detail and perspective for an 8-year-old, was a stone mansion with asymmetrical towers and high-arched windows, a perfect match for Castellano estate. "How did you know what it looks like?" Margot's voice trembled slightly. "I never showed you the pictures." Iris looked up, brown eyes wide and earnest. "I looked it up online at the library. Searched Castellano Castle, Vermont on the iPad. There were old photos." Before Margot could process this, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. A man's voice, deep and measured, spoke without introduction. "Don't go to Castellano estate, Miss Winslow. There are secrets that should remain buried." The line went dead before she could respond. Margot stared at the phone, heart pounding. How did the caller know her plans? Who would care if she visited an abandoned property she now legally owned? The logical explanation was Foster. Perhaps he'd shared the information with other family members who were unhappy with Theodore's decision. But the warning carried an undercurrent of threat that left her unsettled. By morning, the unease had hardened into determination. If someone didn't want her going to Castellano Estate, that was all the more reason to go. The Honda miraculously started on the third try. They packed sandwiches, blankets, and Iris's exploration kit, a flashlight, notebook, and the disposable camera she'd gotten for her birthday. The school had granted Iris a long weekend absence after Margot explained the inheritance situation. The drive north took them through the changing landscape of early autumn New England. Concrete and glass gave way to rolling farmland, then to thickening forest, blazing with fall colors. Iris pressed her face against the window, counting red barns and horses, her excitement growing as civilization thinned. They stopped for gas at a small station in northern Massachusetts. While Iris used the restroom, Margot asked the elderly attendant about directions to Ashford, Vermont. The man's weathered face changed at the mention, eyes narrowing slightly. Ashford. Not much there anymore. What takes you that way? I inherited a property there. Castellano Estate. The gas station attendant's hand stilled on the register. The Castellano place. That old castle. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. They say it's cursed, you know. Strange deaths in that family. Always sudden, always unexplained. He made a subtle warning gesture, surprising in its superstition. I wouldn't spend the night there if I was you, miss. Margot thanked him, stiffly, paid for the gas, and hurried back to the car, trying to dismiss the encounter as small-town superstition. But the man's warning echoed the anonymous phone call too closely for comfort. The GPS signal grew spotty as they approached Ashford, forcing Margot to rely on Foster's handwritten directions. The town itself was barely that. A handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads, most dating from the early 1900s. A general store, a small library, a cafe, a hardware shop. Time seemed to have forgotten this place, or perhaps deliberately bypassed it. They stopped at the cafe, a cozy space called the Mill House, with mismatched furniture and the comforting smell of coffee and fresh bread. The middle-aged woman behind the counter did a poor job of hiding her curiosity when Margot mentioned they were heading to Castellano Estate. Nobody's been out to that place in 40 years as far as I know. We figured it would just collapse into the forest eventually. The woman wiped her hands on her apron, studying Margot with newfound interest. You're a Castellano, then? Before Margot could respond, a gravelly voice came from the corner of the cafe. You're Victor's great-granddaughter. The Castellano eyes give you away. The speaker was an older man, perhaps in his mid-60s, solid and weathered like an oak. He sat alone with a newspaper and coffee-white hair cropped short in a military style. His flannel shirt and work pants suggested a lifetime of manual labor. He folded his paper and approached, extending a calloused hand. Jasper Reed. I helped build the East Wing extension back in '79, just after I got home from the Gulf. Your great-grandfather Victor was an odd duck, but a genius in his way. Jasper's eyes dropped to the brass key visible in Margot's coat pocket. His eyebrows rose slightly. He gave you the key, did he? Theodore finally passed it on. Margot nodded strangely, reluctant to correct his assumption that she'd received the key directly from her uncle. Something in Jasper's manner suggested he knew more about Castellano Estate than he was saying. Their conversation was interrupted when a white-haired woman entered the cafe carrying a stack of books. Dr. Vera Whitfield, the town librarian and local historian, as she promptly introduced herself upon overhearing their discussion. She was perhaps 70, with bright eyes behind cat-eye glasses and an energy that belied her age. Dr. Whitfield was visibly excited at meeting a Castellano. She'd been researching the family for years. She explained particularly their art collection, which had been quite impressive before the war. Victor Castellano had connections with many European artists and collectors in the 1930s. Before Margot could inquire further, Iris tugged at her sleeve, eager to continue their journey. They thanked Jasper and Dr. Whitfield, promising to return to town for supplies if they decided to stay overnight at the estate. The final approach to Castellano estate took them along increasingly narrow roads until Foster's directions instructed them to turn left at the lightning-struck oak. They nearly missed it. An ancient tree split down the middle, its two halves reaching toward the sky like beseeching arms. Beyond it, a gravel road disappeared into dense forest. The rusted iron gates hung partially open, one completely off its hinges. The Castellano crest, once proudly displayed at the center, was now barely visible beneath decades of corrosion. As they drove through, Margot felt a distinct sensation of crossing a boundary. Not just a physical one, but a threshold between her old life and whatever awaited them within. The driveway wound through thick forest for nearly a mile, branches scraping against the car like warning fingers. Iris grew quiet, her earlier excitement tempered by the increasing gloom beneath the canopy. Just as Margot began to wonder if they'd taken a wrong turn, the trees opened up and Castellano estate revealed itself. Margot's breath caught. The photographs hadn't captured its imposing presence. 3 stories of gray-brown stone rose before them, the asymmetrical design featuring multiple turrets and wings that seemed to have grown organically rather than been planned. Gothic Revival windows, many broken or boarded, punctuated the facade like dark eyes. Ivy and moss claimed much of the exterior, nature slowly reclaiming what man had built. Despite decades of neglect, the underlying grandeur remained undeniable. This was no ordinary mansion. This was architecture transported from another time, another continent. Stone gargoyles peered down from rain gutters, their features softened by weathering but still recognizable as fantastical beasts. A massive arched entryway with double oak doors dominated the center of the main facade. "It's just like my drawing," Iris whispered, eyes wide with wonder and apprehension. Margot parked in what had once been a circular driveway, now cracked and sprouting with weeds. As the Honda's engine died, the silence enveloped them. Not the empty silence of abandonment, but the living quiet of nature. Birds called from the surrounding trees. Wind whispered through broken windows. The estate seemed to breathe around them. They approached the entrance cautiously. The massive oak doors were reinforced with black iron bands built to withstand sieges in another century, another country. Margot inserted the brass key into the lock, surprised when it turned smoothly without the resistance she expected from decades of disuse. The door swung inward with a low groan that echoed through the entrance hall. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light from holes in the roof and broken windows. The floor was stone scattered with debris and dead leaves. A grand staircase curved upward into shadow, its banister thick with cobwebs. The entrance hall alone was larger than their entire apartment, with ceilings that soared 20 feet high. Margot called out a tentative hello. Her voice echoed back mockingly. Iris stuck close, one hand clutching her mother's jacket, the other already holding her flashlight, despite the afternoon sun providing adequate if spotty illumination through the broken windows. Beneath the grime and debris, Margot could make out intricate stone carvings around doorways and fireplaces. Hunting scenes, celestial maps, stylized gardens. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each detail rendered with painstaking care, now obscured by decades of neglect. They moved from room to room, a formal dining hall with a table long enough to seat 30, a music room with a dust-shrouded grand piano, parlors and sitting rooms furnished with sheet-covered pieces that suggested Victorian opulence. Most rooms were empty or sparsely furnished, but some still held furniture and decorations preserved beneath dusty sheets like ghosts of a bygone era. In what must have been the library, books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Many were ruined by moisture and rodents, but some on higher shelves looked salvageable. Iris ran her finger along the spines, leaving trails in the dust. The titles ranged from engineering and architecture to art history and mythology, many in languages Margot didn't recognize. As they explored the second floor, Iris discovered a child's bedroom that stopped them both in their tracks. Unlike the other rooms, this one seemed frozen in time. A 4-poster bed with faded blue curtains, shelves of antique toys, a rocking horse in the corner. Most unsettling was the collection of dolls arranged on a window seat, their glass eyes following movement, their porcelain faces cracked with age. "I know which room is ours," Iris announced suddenly, leading Margot down the hallway with surprising certainty. They entered a large bedroom with tall windows facing east, a massive fireplace, and an adjoining smaller room perfect for a child. How Sophie had known the layout was a question Margot wasn't ready to contemplate. As the afternoon light began to fade, they made their way back downstairs. In the kitchen, Margot found signs of more recent habitation. A newer-looking gas camping stove, some canned goods, bottled water. Theodore might never have stayed overnight, but someone had prepared the space for temporary use. Margot was examining a drawer of surprisingly modern utensils when Iris called from the butler's pantry. "Look, Mom, someone's been here not long ago." On the floor lay cigarette butts, still smelling of tobacco, and boot prints in the dust that were clearly recent. Margot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty kitchen. They weren't alone, or at least others had been here very recently. Before she could suggest they leave, the sound of tires on gravel reached them through the broken kitchen window. A car was coming up the driveway. The distinct purr of an expensive engine, unlike her Honda's asthmatic rumble. Margot pulled Iris away from the window, instinctively moving toward the central hallway, where they could either retreat upstairs or exit through the main doors if necessary. Through a front window, she watched a sleek black Bentley pull up beside their weather-beaten Honda. The contrast was almost comical. 3 men emerged. The one from the driver's side wore an impeccably tailored suit, his silver hair contrasting with his tan face. The other 2 men were younger, broader, with the watchful stillness of security personnel. Despite their business attire, there was something predatory in their movements. The older man approached the entrance, the others flanking him slightly behind. Margot hesitated, then stepped into the doorway before they could enter uninvited. Iris remained partially hidden behind her, peering around at the strangers. The silver-haired man paused on the bottom step, surprise flickering across his features, before his expression settled into a practiced smile. "Ms. Winslow, I presume? What a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Holden Schaefer. I represent a development group with significant interest in historic properties like Castellano Estate." Margot said nothing, one arm extended protectively to keep Iris behind her. Schaefer continued smoothly, mounting another step. "I understand you've recently inherited this property. First, let me offer my condolences on your uncle's passing. Theodore and I had several discussions about Castellano Estate over the years." That made Margot find her voice. "You knew my Uncle Schaefer's smile didn't reach his eyes. We had mutual interests, though different perspectives on how to handle them." He gestured toward the crumbling facade. "May I come in? I have a proposition that might interest you." Against her better judgment, Margot stepped aside. Schaefer entered alone, leaving his companions outside. He moved through the entrance hall with the confidence of someone familiar with the space, his expensive shoes leaving clear prints in the dust. Beautiful bones, this place. Terrible shame to see it in such disrepair. His gaze swept the grand staircase, the carved ceilings, the massive fireplace. Of course, the cost of proper restoration would be astronomical. Millions at minimum. He turned to face Margot directly. "I'm prepared to offer you $500,000 cash. No inspections, no questions, a clean transaction." Iris gasped behind Margot. Even Margot felt her breath catch. $500,000. Enough to change everything. A real house in a good school district, a college fund for Iris, a life without choosing between rent and groceries. The question escaped before Margot could consider a more strategic response. "Why would anyone pay that much for this?" Schaefer's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile remained fixed. "Let's say we're collectors of historical properties. Castellano Estate has quite a unique history." His gaze drifted to the second floor. "Quite unique indeed. What kind of history?" Something in his pause made Margot's skin prickle with unease. The kind worth preserving, or perhaps containing. Schaefer reached into his jacket and Margot tensed involuntarily. He withdrew only a business card, offering it with manicured fingers. "My cell phone. Call any time, day or night." But Ms. Winslow, he looked directly at her gray eyes, cold despite his smile. "Don't wait too long. Properties like this can be dangerous for those who don't understand their significance." The threat was implied, but unmistakable. Margot accepted the card without a word. As Schaefer moved toward the door, he paused beside a section of wall paneling, running his fingers along an edge as though searching for something. Finding nothing, his expression hardened momentarily before the smooth mask returned. He nodded a curt goodbye and departed his companions, falling into step as he returned to the Bentley. Margot and Iris watched from the window as the black car disappeared down the driveway, its engine sound fading into the gathering dusk. "I don't like him," Iris whispered, her small hand finding Margot's. "He looks at the house like he wants to eat it." Margot squeezed her daughter's hand in silent agreement, her mind racing. Schaefer's interest and his substantial offer confirmed one thing: Castellano estate held value beyond its crumbling walls. But his warning lingered ominously. Properties like this can be dangerous for those who don't understand their significance. With darkness approaching and too many unsettling questions, Margot decided they would return to town and find a motel for the night. They secured the main doors and drove back to Ashford, the Honda's headlights cutting through the deepening twilight. The only accommodation in town was the Ashford Inn, a Victorian building with 6 rooms for rent above a small restaurant. The innkeeper, a heavy-set woman named Doris, raised her eyebrows when Margot mentioned Castellano estate, but asked no questions as she handed over a key to a comfortable, if dated, room with 2 beds and a shared bathroom down the hall. Iris fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's exploration. Margot lay awake, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Different patterns than those in their apartment, but stains nonetheless. Her mind churned with possibilities. $500,000 would solve every immediate problem in their lives. But Schaefer's interest suggested the property might be worth far more. And then there was the unsettling feeling that she was missing something important. Something about the compass rose on the key, the map fragment, the smooth turn of a lock that should have been frozen with rust after 40 years of disuse. Morning found Margot at the town library before it officially opened, the business card for Foster's office in hand as she used the payphone outside. She had decided to learn more about what exactly she had inherited. Dr. Whitfield arrived to open the library, delighted to find Margot waiting. Inside, the small building housed a surprisingly extensive local history collection. Whitfield led Margot to a section dedicated to Ashford's founding families, including the Castellanos. The historian's enthusiasm was infectious as she pulled out boxes of yellowed newspaper clippings and faded photographs. Castellano estate hadn't been built by some eccentric millionaire, but transported stone by stone from Scotland in 1924. Victor Castellano, Margot's great-grandfather, had purchased a 16th-century castle near Edinburgh that was scheduled for demolition. He'd had it dismantled, each stone numbered, and shipped across the Atlantic to be rebuilt on his Vermont property. The newspapers called it Castellano's Folly, a monument to excess that had nearly bankrupted the family. The reconstruction had taken 7 years, with Victor insisting on using traditional methods wherever possible. The local economy had boomed during the project, with dozens of European stonemasons and craftsmen living in Ashford throughout the reconstruction. But the estate's history took a darker turn in the 1940s. During World War II, the property had been used by the government for unspecified research purposes related to the war effort. The articles were vague, mentioning only scientific research and matters of national security. Then abruptly in 1945, nothing. As if Castellano estate had simply ceased to exist in public record. "Your family owned that place until the 80s, when your uncle bought it back, Doctor," Whitfield explained, adjusting her glasses as she read over Margot's shoulder. "The government requisitioned it during the war." Quite mysterious about the whole thing. Rumors about art storage, code-breaking operations, even testing experimental radar technology. She closed the folder with a thoughtful expression. Families sometimes bury things they'd rather forget, especially rich families, especially during wartime. Margot photocopied everything, her mind piecing together a strange narrative. A castle transported across an ocean, government seizure during the war, family deaths shrouded in mystery, and now Holden Schaefer offering $500,000 for ruins that had stood empty for decades. Back at the inn, she found Iris in the small garden behind the building, sketching in her notebook. The drawings were unnervingly detailed, floor plans of Castellano estate, including rooms they hadn't entered, with doorways and windows placed with architectural precision. When Margot asked how she knew these details, Iris simply shrugged. "It's like I remember it, but I know I've never been there before. It's weird, Mom. But not scary weird. More like finding something you lost a long time ago." Margot called Foster from the inn's phone, the photocopy pages spread before her on the bed. "The castle. What do you know about its history that you didn't tell me?" Foster sighed, the sound crackling through the connection. "I was wondering when you'd ask. Your uncle was very specific. I was to tell you only if you inquired directly. Tell me what that Castellano estate holds the answer to why the family fortune disappeared. Your uncle spent 40 years trying to gain access to one particular room. He believed your great-grandfather hid something there before the government took control of the property." Margot's heart quickened. A locked room. There must be a locked room they hadn't found yesterday. "You found it." Foster's voice sharpened with interest. "Your uncle died believing he was the only one who knew of its existence. What's in it nobody knows for certain. Victor Castellano was many things. An inventor, an art collector. Some say a genius, others say mad. Before the government seized the estate, he claimed to have hidden his greatest treasure where only a true Castellano would think to look. Many have tried to find it. Your uncle bought the castle hoping to succeed where others failed, but he never even visited. No, he was afraid. Some of the family believed there was a curse. Ridiculous, of course, but your uncle was superstitious. He thought if he passed it to the right person." "Why me?" Margot interrupted. "He didn't even know me." Foster was quiet for a moment. "He knew more than you think. He knew you were raising a daughter alone. He knew you worked hard and never asked the family for anything even when you had every right to. He said you were the only Castellano left who understood the value of perseverance." Margot ended the call and sat watching Iris sketch in her notebook, mind churning with new information. A locked room, a hidden treasure, a castle that the government had seized for mysterious wartime research. It sounded like something out of a movie, not her life. But the brass key in her pocket was real, the moss-covered castle was real, and Holden Schaefer's offer and warning were very real. That afternoon, Margot made a decision that would have seemed insane a week ago. She called her boss at the diner and quit. She withdrew her meager savings account, all $1,156 of it, and paid 2 weeks at the Ashford Inn up front. Then she enrolled Iris in the local elementary school, explaining their situation to the principal as a family emergency requiring extended stay. "Where are we going?" Iris asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit as they packed their few belongings into the Honda. "Home," Margot said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "We're going home." They moved into Castellano Estate on a Tuesday afternoon. The first order of business was securing their immediate needs. Margot drove into town and purchased basic tools, tarps for the leaking sections of roof, and supplies to board up broken windows at the hardware store. The cashier mentioned that Jasper Reed might be willing to help with more extensive repairs. Margot found Jasper at his workshop behind the hardware store, surrounded by woodworking projects in various stages of completion. He didn't seem surprised by her request, merely nodding as if he'd been expecting her. Within an hour, his pickup truck was loaded with additional supplies, and he followed her back to the estate. The work began immediately. Together, they patched the kitchen roof, creating a space dry enough to serve as their base camp. Jasper showed Margot how to identify which sections of wiring were dangerous and which could be temporarily restored. The well on the property still functioned, though it needed new piping that Jasper installed with practiced efficiency. "These walls will outlast us all," he said one afternoon, running a calloused hand along the stone. "Victor wouldn't use modern materials. Said they were garbage, wouldn't last a century." Word spread quickly through Ashford. The single mother living in the castle. Some came to gawk, others to whisper. Margot heard the murmurs at the general store, saw the sidelong glances when she picked up Iris from school. Another Castellano's folly, they called it. But Margot didn't care. Each day brought new revelations. Secret passages connecting rooms. A dumbwaiter that still worked if you pulled hard enough. Stone carvings hidden under centuries of grime, faces and flowers in patterns Margot didn't recognize. Iris adapted with the resilience of childhood. She made friends at school despite being the castle girl, and her teacher reported she was thriving academically. Each afternoon she'd rush back to the estate, eager to explore another corner with her expedition notebook, filling with drawings and observations. Jasper became a regular presence, teaching Margot basic carpentry and electrical work. She proved a quick study, surprising herself with aptitude for practical skills she'd never had reason to develop. Together they made the kitchen and 2 bedrooms habitable with functioning electricity from updated wiring. 3 weeks into their castle life, the intimidation began. First it was just cars driving by slowly at night, headlights sweeping across their windows. Then Margot found footprints in the mud outside circling the estate, suggesting someone had been looking for another entrance. She installed motion sensors, cheap ones from the hardware store, but better than nothing. Jasper added deadbolts to the exterior doors and taught Margot some basic self-defense moves from his military days. The second time Holden Schaefer appeared, he wasn't alone. 4 men accompanied him, all wearing suits that didn't quite hide the bulge of shoulder holsters. His Bentley pulled up the driveway late on a Friday afternoon as Margot and Jasper were replacing broken glass in the library windows. "Ms. Winslow," he said pleasantly, as if they were old friends meeting for tea. "How are you settling in?" "Fine," Margot replied tersely. Iris was upstairs doing homework, and Margot was grateful she couldn't see the hard-eyed men studying their home like they were memorizing every entrance. "I see you've begun renovations. Ambitious." Schaefer's gaze settled on Jasper, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Mr. Reed, still the castle's guardian after all these years." Jasper's straightened ladder creaking beneath his weight. "Some things are worth protecting, Schaefer. Some things should stay where they belong." Schaefer's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed, that's precisely my position." He turned back to Margot. "I thought I'd renew my offer. $1 million. More than generous for a property in this condition. Save yourself years of work and expense." Margot crossed her arms, buying time to study her visitor. "Why do you want it so badly?" "Let's say I'm a history enthusiast. This castle has such fascinating stories." "Like what?" "Oh, the usual. Bootlegging in the 20s. Those wartime experiments. Did you know they tested radar technology here?" Schaefer leaned in conspiratorially. "And of course the legend of Victor Castellano's hidden treasure. Though between us, I think that's just a fairy tale, don't you?" Margot kept her face neutral. "Probably. Still, legends have a way of causing trouble. People get obsessive. They take risks." Schaefer's eyes hardened, though his tone remained conversational. "Sometimes people get hurt, especially single mothers with no one to protect them. Take the money. Start fresh somewhere safe, somewhere else. Is that a threat?" "Advice, Miss Winslow, from someone who's seen how these situations can escalate." After they left, Margot sat on the kitchen floor shaking. $1 million. Safety for Iris. A life without looking over her shoulder. But then she remembered Foster's words about Theodore, the only Castellano left who understood the value of perseverance. That night, Margot sat before the fireplace in the library, turning the brass key over in her hands. The compass rose caught the firelight, each cardinal direction marked with precision: north, south, east, west. The map fragment's words echoed in her mind. "North will guide the way." She examined the base of the handle where it met the shaft. There, almost invisible, a tiny seam. Heart-pounding, Margot pressed the compass, rose and twisted. The handle separated from the shaft, revealing a smaller key hidden inside. "Only a true Castellano would think to look," she whispered to herself. The next morning, Margot stood before Jasper and Iris with the hidden key. "We're going to search every room systematically. This opens something. We just need to find what." They began with the main floor, trying the small key in every lock they encountered. Most doors opened with regular keys Jasper had helped locate or replace. The ornate brass key remained a mystery, but now Margot knew it held secrets within secrets. In the library, Iris noticed something odd about a large tapestry depicting a hunting scene. Unlike other wall hangings, this one was mounted on a wooden frame that extended several inches from the wall. When they removed it, they discovered a small door barely 5 feet tall, but the lock was modern. "High security mechanism," Jasper observed, whistling softly. "Not your standard hardware store deadbolt. Looks military-grade, actually. Your uncle must have installed this. Why put a modern lock on an old door?" The small key didn't fit. Jasper even attempted to pick the lock without success. The door remained stubbornly sealed, its contents a mystery. That evening, Dr. Whitfield joined them for dinner in the kitchen, excited by their discovery. The historian confirmed that Victor Castellano had been obsessed with security and puzzles, often creating elaborate mechanisms to protect his valuables. He was quite the mechanical genius, she explained, warming her hands by the fire. designed his own locks and safes. During the war, there were rumors he consulted on security systems for military installations. Iris, who had been quietly drawing at the table, suddenly looked up, like a puzzle box. "My friend Zach has one where you have to push hidden buttons in the right order to open it." Dr. Whitfield smiled at the child. "Exactly like that, dear." Victor Castellano loved puzzles and secret compartments. He believed valuable things should require effort to obtain. During restoration of the small stone structure that concealed what Jasper said was an old tunnel entrance, workers removing ivy from the walls uncovered a carved stone panel hidden by decades of growth. The Castellano family crest, surrounded by symbols similar to those on the brass key. Jasper recognized the pattern, immediately calling Margot to examine the weathered carvings. Similar design to what you described on that door lock, but different. Another puzzle. Margot contacted Foster, who arranged for examination of Theodore's remaining personal effects. Among them was a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be ancient coins, Roman according to the appraiser's report dating from the 1st century. Theodore's journals made no mention of the coins, but when Margot showed them to Anna Bergstein during her first visit to the estate, the elderly woman recognized them immediately. Anna was 85, tiny and severe, with silver hair twisted into a bun. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, driven by Dr. Whitfield, and stood at the entrance hall, studying the space with eyes that held decades of memory. Victor collected ancient currencies, Anna said, her voice carrying a slight German accent, fascinated by the way they combined art history and commerce in portable form. These specific coins were displayed in a cabinet in his study before the government requisitioned the estate. Anna Bergstein had been 18 when she fled Germany in 1938, the daughter of a prominent Jewish art dealer in Berlin. Victor Castellano had brought her family to Ashford, providing sanctuary when few others would. "We weren't the only ones," Anna explained as they sat in the kitchen over coffee. "Dozens of families passed through Castellano estate. Some stayed, others moved on to New York or California. But Victor gave everyone shelter and purpose. The estate became our fortress against the darkness spreading across Europe." Anna had worked as an assistant cataloger, helping document each artwork that arrived in secret shipments. After Pearl Harbor, when the government officially commandeered the estate, she'd stayed on as a translator and consultant. The real trouble began after the war ended. Anna continued, her gnarled fingers working the coffee cup. Men came with papers claiming ownership of various pieces. Some claims were legitimate families who had survived and were trying to rebuild. Others, her mouth tightened into a thin line, others were vultures, collaborators, people who had profited from Jewish suffering now trying to claim the spoils, and Victor refused to give them anything. Anna's eyes flashed with decades-old fire. He was magnificent in his fury, told them he would rather burn the entire collection than return a single brushstroke to thieves. The government men didn't like that. It created diplomatic complications. But Victor held firm. The standoff continued for nearly 2 years. Then in 1947, Victor Castellano died suddenly. Anna's voice dropped to a whisper. He wasn't sick, not even old, barely 60, but they said heart attack. And who could argue the family was frightened? They moved away. The art disappeared. Everyone assumed the government had finally seized it. But he'd hidden it, Margot said. Where only a true Castellano would think to look. Anna nodded, a sad smile creasing her face. He always said blood remembers what the mind forgets. I think he knew someday the right Castellano would come home. Margot brought the Roman coins to the stone structure, studying the carved panel with new understanding. The depressions in the stone matched the dimensions of the coins precisely. When placed in the correct arrangement, guided by the compass rose pattern, a section of the stone wall swung inward, revealing a small chamber. Inside was a metal document box, its lock matching the smaller key hidden within the brass key. The contents were simple but profound. Victor Castellano's personal journal sealed in protective material, a letter addressed to the finder, and a single canvas wrapped in archival fabric. The letter, dated 3 days before Victor's death in 1947, explained everything. To whoever finds this, I trust it will be family, though perhaps generations hence. The art in the vault represents my life's work, protecting cultural treasures from those who would destroy or exploit them. Most pieces have rightful owners who may yet be found, but this one work is different. It is my own creation, painted the year I began transporting this castle across the ocean. It holds no monetary value, but perhaps some sentimental worth to those who share my blood and my purpose. If you have found this chamber, you have already demonstrated the perseverance and insight I hoped would endure in the Castellano line. May this castle stand another 5 centuries, and may it always shelter those who value beauty and truth above temporary power. The canvas, when carefully unwrapped, revealed an amateur's landscape painting of Castellano estate as it had appeared in the 1920s, newly reconstructed and not yet embraced by ivy and moss. At the bottom, in careful script, "For the Castellano who finds this, you were worth waiting for." But the journal held more than sentiment. Victor had documented everything, including encoded instructions for accessing the main vault. The small door behind the library tapestry was the entrance, but Theodore had added the modern lock out of fear, unable to bring himself to actually open it. Jasper located the vault key among Theodore's effects that Foster shipped overnight. The next morning, Margot stood before the door with Jasper and Iris behind her. The modern key slid into the lock perfectly. Margot aligned the compass points north to north and turned. The lock opened with a soft click that seemed to echo through time. The door swung inward. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of old paper and something else. Machine oil, perhaps. Preservation materials. Margot stepped inside, flashlight beam sweeping across what lay beyond. It wasn't a room. It was a vault. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Tables covered in documents, maps, and photographs. And in the center, under dusty tarps, shapes that made her breath catch. She pulled back the tarp and nearly dropped the flashlight. Paintings. At least a dozen. Even in the harsh beam she could see they were masterpieces. The colors, the brushwork. These weren't prints or copies. They were real. Jasper let out a low whistle behind her. My God, is that a Monet? Margot's hands shook as she moved to the filing cabinets. The first drawer contained certificates, provenance papers, authentication documents. Names jumped out. Monet Renoir, a small Rembrandt sketch. But it was the second drawer that made her sink to her knees. Government contracts, classified stamps. Page after page detailing Operation Safeguard, a World War II program where private collectors had hidden valuable artworks to prevent them from being seized by Nazis if America fell. Castellano Estate had been a secret repository. Victor hadn't just been hiding art, he'd been protecting it. From museums, private collectors, even European families fleeing the war. The war had ended, and the art should have been returned. But according to Victor's final entries, he discovered something disturbing. Several pieces in his care had been stolen by Nazis from Jewish families. The supposed owners, claiming them after the war, were collaborators, thieves trying to profit from tragedy. Victor had refused to return those pieces. And when the government tried to force him, he'd hidden them where only a true Castellano would think to look. Margot sat amidst the treasure, surrounded by art that museums would kill for understanding. Finally, why Schaefer wanted the castle so badly. Some of these paintings belonged to families destroyed in the Holocaust, some belonged to museums, and some, according to Victor's careful notes, belonged to no one anymore, their entire families erased from existence. Iris appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mom, what is this place?" Margot pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "It's complicated, baby. Are we rich now?" Margot laughed, surprising herself. "Maybe, but these aren't really ours. Our great-great-grandfather was protecting them for people. Some of those people are gone now, but that doesn't mean we get to keep them. So what do we do? The right thing." As she continued examining documents by flashlight, Iris curled up on her lap, occasionally asking questions. Margot found letters from families thanking Victor for protecting their heritage. Photographs of artwork being packed, hidden, saved. A whole secret history of preservation and resistance. By dawn, Margot had formed a plan. First, she would call a lawyer, not Foster, but someone who specialized in art repatriation. Then the FBI's Art Crime Division. This wasn't just about her and Iris anymore. This was about justice decades delayed. As the first light of morning filtered through the vault's small window, Margot looked down at her sleeping daughter, and then at the paintings surrounding them. Millions of dollars in lost art, each piece with its own tragic story. For the first time since inheriting Castellano estate, she understood why Theodore had chosen her. Not because she was the family failure, but because she would do what was right no matter how hard the path. But first, she needed to protect what they'd found. Margot called Jasper, who arrived within the hour. Together they photographed everything, documented the vault's contents, and secured the entrance. The FBI's Art Crime Division wouldn't arrive until afternoon. 12 hours to guard a fortune in masterpieces that had already survived a world war and 70 years of secrecy. 12 hours during which Schaefer might return, this time with more than threats. Jasper set up a watch rotation, his military training evident in how his eyes periodically scanned the windows and doorways. The feds will want to confiscate everything. Take all the credit, too. Margot gestured toward the vault where Iris was carefully sketching one of the Monets. What else could I do? These paintings were stolen from families during the Holocaust. Victor protected them. I have to finish what he started. Jasper nodded slowly, respect kindling in his eyes. Victor would be proud. Not many would choose justice over fortune. By mid-morning, Margot noticed cars appearing more frequently on the access road visible from the North Tower. Someone was watching them. She saw the glint of a lens in the tree line. Schaefer knew something had changed. Jasper installed additional sensors and positioned himself on the roof with a clear view of the driveway. Just precautions, he assured Margot, but his hand never strayed far from the shotgun loaded with rock salt. Agent Daniel Roberts from the FBI's Art Crime Division called ahead with preliminary questions. One caught Margot off guard. Your uncle's death. We're reviewing that case. I thought he died naturally. Roberts's silence was more troubling than words. We're investigating. Mr. Castellano purchased the estate in the 80s. He hired researchers to investigate rumors about hidden art. That drew attention from certain organizations. He died before locating the vault. The circumstances now appear suspicious in retrospect. You think he was murdered? Let's just say we have questions. And Ms. Winslow, be careful. Theodore wasn't the first person to die mysteriously while investigating this property. The afternoon dragged with agonizing slowness. Iris finished her homework, then helped Margot inventory the vault's contents using Victor's detailed cataloging system. Each painting had a story, a family, a journey from safety to theft to recovery. As evening approached, Margot felt the weight of eyes on the estate. The surveillance had become constant. Whoever Schaefer worked for knew they were running out of time. Just past midnight, Iris shook Margot awake. Mom, there are people outside. Jasper was already up, shotgun across his knees. Through the kitchen window, Margot watched 3 vehicles park at the tree line. Headlights off, engines silent. Dark figures moved across the grounds, approaching the estate from multiple directions. They're not even trying to hide. Jasper whispered, his voice carrying the calm of someone who'd faced worse. That's not good. Means they don't care if we see them coming. Should we run? Jasper shook his head. Too late for that. But I know this castle better than they do. He guided them toward the butler's pantry. Behind the wine racks, a hidden staircase. Servant stairs, he explained. Leads up to the east wing 3rd floor, then connects to the main house through the attic space. Victor showed me during the renovations. The staircase was narrow and steep, cobwebs hanging from a ceiling so low Jasper had to stoop. Iris climbed steadily without complaint, one hand clutching her mother's, the other holding the flashlight. They emerged into a dusty corridor lined with small bedrooms, former servants' quarters in the east wing's 3rd floor. Jasper led them to a small door that opened onto a catwalk spanning the attic space connecting to the main house. Below them stretched a vast open area filled with trunks, furniture, and decades of accumulated storage. From this vantage point they could hear movement in the main house. The front door splintering, heavy footsteps in the entrance hall, voices calling to each other as the intruders spread throughout the ground floor. Jasper positioned them behind a stack of steamer trunks overlooking the attic access point. If they follow our trail to the servant stairs, they'll come through that door. We can circle around behind them through the north gallery. A crash echoed from below, followed by angry shouting. They found the empty vault. Jasper's expression hardened in the dim light. I need you both to stay hidden. I'm going to lead them away from you. Before Margot could protest, a familiar voice echoed up the stairwell. Ms. Winslow, I know you're still here. My associates have confirmed your vehicle remains parked outside. Let's discuss this situation like reasonable people. Holden Schaefer, his cultured tones carrying easily in the cavernous space. Jasper tensed, signaling Margot and Iris to remain silent and hidden. Schaefer continued, his voice growing closer. The art belongs to my clients, Ms. Winslow. They have documentation proving ownership. Your great-grandfather stole their cultural heritage. We simply want to return it to the rightful owners. Margot bit back a retort, remembering Anna's words about vultures and collaborators. Footsteps on the servants' stairs now. Two men emerged into the attic, not Schaefer but clearly his employees. They wore dark tactical clothing and carried flashlights and pistols, moving with professional precision, sweeping their lights methodically across the space. Margot pressed Iris against the wall behind the trunks, breathing as shallowly as possible. The footsteps came closer, light beams dancing just feet away. Then, a tremendous crash from the far side of the attic. Jasper had pushed over a stack of furniture, creating a diversion. The men immediately turned, moving toward the sound, calling to others below. Jasper was already gone, racing along the catwalk toward the main house. The men followed their shouts, bringing others up from below. Margot waited until the footsteps faded, then pulled Iris toward the servants' stairs. They descended as quickly as silence allowed, emerging into the butler's pantry just as voices echoed from the kitchen. Two more of Schaefer's men entered the pantry. Margot pushed Iris behind her, frantically looking for an escape route, finding none. The taller intruder raised his flashlight, illuminating them against the wall. "Well, well, Mrs. Winslow and the kid. Boss will be pleased." A sharp crack split the air, followed by a second. Both men crumpled to the floor. Jasper stood in the doorway, shotgun raised, face grim in the flashlight beam. "Rock salt loads. Painful but won't kill them. But they'll think twice before coming after a family again." His military background showed in the efficient way he zip-tied the stunned men's hands. More shouts from the front of the house. Jasper guided Margot and Iris through the kitchen to a narrow door leading to the cellar. "We need to get to the tunnel." The tunnel had been part of the original Scottish castle, reconstructed along with everything else when Victor transported the structure to America. Originally designed as an escape route during medieval sieges, it stretched nearly a quarter-mile, emerging in the small stone structure disguised as a groundskeeper's shed. They were halfway through when gunshots echoed behind them, bullets ricocheting off stone walls. Jasper pushed them forward, occasionally turning to fire the shotgun, more to slow their pursuers than to hit anyone in the darkness. The tunnel exit was blocked by a rusted iron gate. Jasper struggled with the ancient mechanism, decades of disuse making it resistant to his efforts. Behind them, flashlight beams bounced off tunnel walls as their pursuers closed the distance. Iris squeezed past the adults, her small hands reaching through the bars to manipulate the lock from the other side. "It's like the puzzle box Zach showed me. You have to press here and here at the same time." The gate swung open with a protesting screech of metal. They stumbled into the night air, the small stone shed offering momentary cover. Jasper led them into the forest, moving away from the lights of the main estate. They'd gone perhaps 50 yards when headlights suddenly blazed ahead, momentarily blinding them. "Ms. Winslow, Agent Roberts, FBI. Are you all right?" The cavalry had arrived. Roberts and a tactical team surrounded the property, alerted by silent alarms the FBI had installed after removing the artwork earlier that day for authentication and safe storage. Within minutes, Schaefer and his men were in custody, their vehicles blockaded on the estate's driveway. Roberts led Margot, Iris, and Jasper to the command vehicle, where they provided preliminary statements. Schaefer and his associates would face multiple federal charges: breaking and entering, attempted robbery, assault with deadly weapons, and various art crime statutes. Most significant was Roberts' explanation of Schaefer's real identity and motivation. His real name is Holden Schaefer. His grandfather was Heinrich Schaefer, a banker who collaborated with Nazi officials, helping them liquidate assets seized from Jewish families. After the war, he reinvented himself as a respected financier, building a legitimate business empire on the foundation of stolen wealth. The documents we found in Victor Castellano's vault have already helped us connect Schaefer's family to specific artworks that disappeared during the war. This evidence will support international repatriation efforts beyond just the pieces we recovered here. Dawn broke as Margot stood on the estate's front steps watching FBI agents processing the scene. Iris had finally fallen asleep in the back of Roberts's car, exhausted by the night's events. Jasper sat nearby, receiving medical attention for a graze wound he hadn't bothered to mention during their escape. The magnitude of what they had experienced, what they had helped bring to light, was still sinking in. Not just the recovery of priceless art, but the exposure of decades of deception and the possibility of justice for families who had lost everything. Agent Roberts approached with a satellite phone. "There's someone who'd like to speak with you, a woman from Paris, Esther Bergman. She believes her grandfather's paintings were among those recovered." The elderly woman's voice crackled with emotion as Margot identified herself. "My grandfather's watercolors of the Seine. Are they really safe?" "We thought them lost forever when the Germans came." Margot confirmed what Roberts had told her. 3 delicate watercolors carefully preserved in the vault, their provenance meticulously documented by Victor Castellano. "When he took them for safekeeping, my grandfather said we would see them again when the madness ended, but he did not survive, and neither did my parents. I am the last." Esther's voice broke slightly. "Your great-grandfather kept his promise across time, across death itself." In the days that followed, Margot and Iris temporarily relocated to the Ashford Inn, while the estate became an active crime scene and research center. The FBI had removed all 12 paintings for authentication and secure storage, leaving behind only Victor's personal landscape and his journals, which they deemed non-evidentiary. Iris struggled more than Margot had anticipated. The nightmares came every night now, not just occasionally. The 8-year-old would wake screaming about men in black coming through walls, about running through endless stone corridors with no exit. She checked locks compulsively 3 times, 4 times, her small hands trembling as she tested each door before bed. Anna Bergstein visited the inn one afternoon, bringing homemade cookies and sitting with Iris while Margot handled phone calls with lawyers and federal agents. The elderly woman shared her own experiences of fear and flight during the war, speaking matter-of-factly about the nightmares that had plagued her for decades. "I was not much older than you when I first came to America, to that very castle. I had nightmares too. Dreams of men in black coats coming to take us away. Of running through streets that turned into mazes with no way out." Iris looked up from the cookie she'd been crumbling. "What helped you?" "First, I learned where all the exits were. Knowledge is power, especially when you are afraid. Victor showed me every door, every window, every passage in that house. Second, I learned to defend myself. Just small things, but enough to feel less helpless." Jasper, overhearing this conversation, offered to teach Iris basic self-defense. The lessons became a daily ritual at the inn's small garden. Simple techniques adapted for a child's strength and size, focusing more on awareness and escape than confrontation. Iris approached the training with unexpected seriousness, practicing blocking movements and breakaway techniques with focused determination. Most importantly, Anna added one evening after a particularly effective practice session, "I learned that fear is not weakness. It is information. It tells us to be cautious, but not paralyzed. The brave are not those who feel no fear, but those who act despite it." The simple wisdom resonated. Gradually, the nightmares decreased in frequency. Iris began exploring the estate again once the FBI released it, though now with a small notebook documenting exit routes and hiding places. Knowledge as armor against uncertainty. Agent Roberts returned 2 weeks after the arrests with preliminary valuations. The paintings alone were worth approximately $45 million at current market values. But their historical and cultural significance multiplied that many times over. These weren't just masterpieces, he explained. They were survivors' witnesses to one of history's darkest chapters. Victor's documentation proved equally invaluable. His detailed records provided irrefutable evidence of the artwork's provenance, who had owned them before the war, how they had come into his protection, and in many cases which families or institutions had legitimate claims to their return. Most surprising were the government files Victor had somehow obtained. Internal memos revealing that certain officials had been prepared to approve dubious ownership claims in exchange for political and economic concessions from former Nazi collaborators who had rebranded themselves as Cold War allies. The 7 paintings Victor had purchased legally before the war would be returned to Margot once the investigation concluded, their appraised value approximately $6 million. Additionally, several governments and insurance companies were offering substantial finder's fees and rewards for the recovery. France was particularly grateful, 3 of their national treasures having been among the recovered works. They offered a special compensation package of approximately $2 million after taxes. The final tally was staggering. Nearly $5 million in various rewards, fees, and compensations, plus ownership of the 7 family paintings worth $6 million, enough to restore Castellano estate properly and establish Iris's college fund with plenty to spare. But the money felt secondary to Margot. The estate itself, once a burden, had become precious, not for its dollar value but for its place in history and in her family's legacy. With a portion of the reward money, Margot established the Castellano Foundation for Art Repatriation, its mission to fund research and legal assistance for families still seeking lost heirlooms. Dr. Vera Whitfield agreed to serve as executive director, bringing academic rigor and institutional connections. Anna Bergstein headed the Historical Documentation Initiative, recording testimonials from survivors and their descendants. Margot positioned the foundation as independent from both government agencies and major museums, a neutral intermediary focused solely on reconnecting looted art with rightful owners. This stance occasionally created tension with larger institutions that preferred handling such matters internally, but earned respect from families who had struggled for decades against bureaucratic stonewalling. The Foundation's most powerful tool emerged from an unexpected source. During trial preparation, FBI technicians had digitized all documents from Victor's vault. Roberts shared this database with Margot, who worked with computer specialists to develop a searchable system connecting artwork provenance with transportation records, government requisitions, and post-war claims. When the database launched publicly in January, it created shockwaves through the art world. The Foundation identified over 200 works in American collections with clear evidence of looting, forced sales, or questionable post-war acquisition. The list included pieces by Matisse, Picasso, Monet, and Renoir. Museum responses varied. Larger institutions with powerful legal teams issued carefully worded statements promising to review the research and follow established protocols. Smaller museums lacking such resources often engaged more directly with the Foundation's findings. The National Gallery in Washington became an unexpected ally when its director announced a comprehensive review of all European acquisitions made between 1945 and 1960. Margot received notice that Holden Schaefer's trial date had been set for early November in federal court in Boston. The charges were substantial: breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, assault with deadly weapons, illegal firearms possession, conspiracy to traffic stolen artwork, and most seriously, conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Theodore Castellano. Agent Roberts visited to prepare Margot for her testimony, bringing case files and evidence documentation. "I should warn you, the defense will try to undermine your credibility. They'll suggest you manipulated the situation to your financial advantage, perhaps even planted the artwork yourself." Roberts spread photographs across the table. Surveillance images of Theodore from 2 years before his death, followed by autopsy photos. The pattern matches other victims in suspected art trafficking cases. A sophisticated poison that mimics heart failure, nearly undetectable unless you're specifically looking for it. "We've turned Schaefer's right-hand man. He's confirmed the operation goes back decades. Your uncle wasn't their first victim." The trial began the first week of November, attracting international media attention. Margot's photograph appeared in newspapers worldwide despite her attempts to maintain privacy. The courthouse steps became a daily gauntlet of reporters shouting questions. Inside, the process unfolded with methodical precision. Opening statements, evidence presentations, expert testimony on art provenance and authentication. Margot sat through days of proceedings, taking notes, her heart racing each time testimony touched on her family. She testified for 3 days, describing the discovery of the vault, the documentation inside, and Schaefer's escalating threats. Defense attorneys attempted to portray her as an opportunistic fortune hunter who had manipulated her way into an inheritance and fabricated threats to gain sympathy and financial rewards. The most difficult moment came during cross-examination. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, leaned against the witness stand. "Isn't it convenient, Mrs. Winslow? that you, a stranger to your estranged uncle, suddenly inherited exactly the property containing a multi-million-dollar art collection? Isn't it possible you and Theodore Castellano conspired to hide these works from legitimate claimants?" Margot gripped the stand, anger rising. "My uncle was murdered by your client's associates for trying to do what I eventually did: uncover the truth and return these artworks to their rightful owners. If I'd been part of some conspiracy, why would I immediately call the FBI instead of quietly selling the paintings? Why establish a foundation dedicated to returning these works rather than claiming them for myself?" The defense attorney had no effective response. Margot's righteous indignation resonated with the jury, her integrity self-evident in her choices. On the trial's 10th day, Holden Schaefer himself took the stand. Prison-issued clothing had diminished his formerly imposing presence. His testimony revealed the full extent of the network he represented. Wealthy collectors who specialized in acquiring art with questionable provenance, particularly pieces that had disappeared during World War II. Under prosecution questioning, Schaefer's facade of refinement crumbled. When confronted with evidence linking his grandfather Heinrich Schaefer to Nazi art confiscation, he exploded in anger. "Those paintings were legally acquired. My grandfather provided financial services during a chaotic time. These so-called victims abandoned their property when they fled. We simply preserved what would otherwise have been destroyed." The courtroom reacted with horrified silence. His outburst revealed the callous rationalization behind decades of profiting from tragedy, the entitled belief that theft could be legitimized through paperwork and time. During a recess, Anna Bergstein faced the media outside the courthouse. At 85, she was still formidable, addressing international outlets in 6 languages with personal testimony about the artworks Victor had rescued and the families who had entrusted their cultural treasures to him during humanity's darkest hour. This verdict is not about money or property. It is about acknowledging theft for what it is, even when draped in legal language. It is about recognizing that objects removed under threat of death are not abandoned. They are stolen. Her words, delivered with quiet dignity, moved many viewers to tears. Media coverage shifted dramatically after her testimony, the narrative transforming from sensational treasure hunt to profound moral reckoning. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge, citing the historical significance of the crimes and their connection to Holocaust-era theft, sentenced Schaefer to the maximum 15 years in federal prison, forfeiture of assets and restitution payments to identified victims. As Schaefer was led away, he locked eyes with Margot one final time. "I was just the front man. There are others who will continue this work. Some treasures belong to those with the power to protect them." Margot didn't flinch. "That's where you're wrong. They belong to their rightful owners. Always, have always will." By the following spring, the Foundation's work had facilitated the return of 23 artworks to families or institutions with legitimate claims. Each return brought not just media coverage, but profound human moments. Elderly survivors touching canvases they had last seen as children. Museum directors welcoming back pieces thought destroyed during bombing raids. Grandchildren seeing for the first time the paintings their ancestors had described in family stories. The most moving reunion involved Esther Bergman, who traveled from Paris to Boston to receive 3 watercolors painted by her grandfather. Delicate Paris street scenes that had been wedding gifts to her parents, the only surviving pieces of a family collection, once numbering over 50 works. Margot accompanied Esther to the secure facility where the paintings were stored pending final authentication and release. The curator carefully unveiled the first watercolor. The Seine at dawn, fog rising from the water, Notre Dame's silhouette emerging from morning mist. To see these again, Esther whispered, her fingers hovering inches above the protected surface. "It is like hearing my grandfather's voice after 80 years of silence." During her week-long stay, Esther developed a special bond with Iris, recognizing in the child's artistic sensitivity echoes of her own childhood before war had shattered its normalcy. Before departing, Esther presented Iris with a small watercolor set that had belonged to her grandfather. Brushes with ivory handles worn smooth by decades of use, pigments in tiny porcelain cups, all contained in a weathered leather case. He would want another artist to use these. Art outlives us all. It is how we speak to the future. The rewards and recovered paintings provided financial security. Margot had never imagined, but they also brought persistent pressures. Annual maintenance costs for Castellano estate ran approximately $200,000. Historic restoration required specialized craftsmen whose expertise commanded premium prices. The slate roof alone had demanded workers from Vermont who understood traditional techniques. The heating system needed complete replacement with materials that would last another century. Margot found herself constantly fundraising through the foundation, hosting events, courting donors, managing budgets that would have terrified her a year earlier. She'd transformed from waitress to nonprofit director, from struggling single mother to custodian of cultural heritage. The learning curve was steep and exhausting. More troubling were the ethical complexities that emerged. Several artworks had multiple potentially legitimate claimants. A painting owned by a Jewish family in Vienna, sold under duress in 1938, then purchased in good faith by an American museum in 1946. The descendants wanted it returned. The museum argued they'd acquired it legally, had cared for it for decades, and shared it with the public. Who was right? The foundation navigated these disputes with diplomacy, but not every case had a clear answer. Margot learned to accept ambiguity, to facilitate conversations, rather than impose judgments, to help parties find compromise when perfect justice proved impossible. Relations with other Castellano family members remained strained. Her cousins had challenged Theodore's will in court, arguing undue influence and mental incompetence. They lost decisively, but the bitterness persisted. Family reunions, when Margot bothered to attend, were Arctic affairs. She'd done the right thing, but the cost was isolation from the family that had already abandoned her once. Schaefer's warning proved prescient. The art trafficking network was larger than one man. Margot occasionally received anonymous threats, veiled warnings to stop interfering with legitimate business. She hired security consultants, maintained the sensor systems Jasper had installed, and lived with low-level anxiety that someone else might come for what Victor had protected. In June, Castellano Estate received official designation as a National Historic Landmark, recognizing its significance in American architectural history and its role in preserving cultural heritage during World War II. The designation brought additional protections and made the estate eligible for preservation grants, ensuring its maintenance beyond Margot's lifetime. The ceremony attracted national media and government officials, including representatives from the State Department's Cultural Affairs Division. Margot accepted the designation plaque with characteristic modesty, redirecting attention to the broader significance of Operation Safeguard and the ongoing work of repatriation. As autumn arrived again, Margot stood one morning in the entrance hall watching sunlight stream through newly restored stained glass windows. The patterns it cast across the wooden floors reminded her of Victor's painting, the amateur landscape he'd created as a love letter to his achievement. That canvas now hung in the foundation's small gallery, a reminder that some inheritances transcended monetary value. The vault itself had been restored and repurposed as a secure research room where scholars could study Victor's extensive documentation by appointment. The rest of the estate gradually came back to life. The roof no longer leaked. Windows gleamed with new glass. Gardens emerged from wilderness under the guidance of a landscape historian who'd helped restore the original design. Jasper had evolved from occasional helper to full partner in both the restoration and in Margot's life. Their relationship had deepened organically over months of working side by side, rebuilding not just the castle but their respective lives. Both carried histories that made them cautious about romantic entanglements, but in quiet moments atop the North Tower they'd rebuilt together, words seemed unnecessary. One evening, standing at that observation platform with the property spread below them, illuminated by sunset, Jasper turned to face her. "Margot Winslow, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. I'm not good with fancy words, but I know what I feel. This past year working alongside you, watching you fight for what's right, seeing you rebuild not just this place but a legacy." Margot placed her fingers gently against his lips. "Yes." His weathered face creased with surprise and understanding. "Yes, to what exactly?" "Yes to whatever you're asking. Yes to us. Yes to building something that lasts." As the first anniversary of their arrival at Castellano Estate approached, Iris announced she wanted a birthday party. Not just any celebration, but one that included everyone who'd helped save the castle. What began as a children's birthday party evolved into something more symbolic, a community celebration of the estate's resurrection. Tables laden with food stretched along one wall of the grand hall, now restored to its original glory. Children played elaborate games of hide and seek throughout the public areas. Adults gathered in conversational clusters, many seeing the fully restored interior for the first time. Jasper's gift was a custom-built treehouse in an ancient oak near the small lake on the property. Designed as a miniature version of the estate itself, complete with tiny towers and dormer windows, the craftsmanship was exquisite. The structure was sound enough to last decades. Dr. Whitfield contributed a leather-bound collection of books on architecture and art history, selected to challenge Iris's advanced reading level while nurturing her specific interests. Anna presented a handmade quilt incorporating fabric scraps from the estate's original curtains and upholstery preserved during restoration. Margot's gift was more intangible. Permission to establish a children's architecture workshop at the estate where local kids could learn basic design and construction principles through hands-on projects. The program would become part of the Foundation's educational outreach, with Iris serving as junior instructor alongside professional architects and builders. As evening approached, Jasper surprised everyone by setting up an outdoor projector. On the stone wall of the estate, he displayed a digitized home movie from the 1930s footage of Victor supervising construction of the East Wing. The grainy black-and-white images brought Victor to life in ways photographs never had. His purposeful stride as he inspected stonework, his animated conversations with craftsmen, his occasional glances toward the camera with what seemed like amused tolerance. Margot watched transfixed as her great-grandfather moved through scenes of construction that mirrored the restoration she had overseen nearly a century later. The family resemblance was striking, not just physical features, but mannerisms. The tilt of the head when considering a problem, the way he used his hands when explaining a concept to workers. Iris sat forward in her chair, eyes never leaving the projected images. She whispered, barely audible, "I knew he looked like that." The comment might have been dismissed as a child's imagination, except that the footage had been discovered only days earlier in a town resident's attic during spring cleaning. Iris had never seen photographs of Victor from this period of his life. The moment passed without further explanation, adding another thread to the tapestry of inexplicable connections between Iris and the estate's history. Later that week, during restoration of the West Tower, workers removing damaged plaster made an unexpected discovery. Beneath decades of wallpaper and deteriorated covering, delicate paintings emerged. Celestial maps with gold leaf stars, their colors remarkably preserved where they hadn't been exposed to light or moisture. The whole room might be like this. An Italian artist, Victor, apparently commissioned to paint the tower interior before covering it over during the war, possibly to protect it from government requisition. The conservator examining the frescoes believed they might be valuable in their own right, another layer of treasure hidden in plain sight. That seemed to be a pattern with Castellano Estate. Each wall, each floor, each ceiling potentially concealing history. 18 months after Margot and Iris first drove through the rusted gates, the estate stood transformed. Not returned to its original grandeur exactly, but reborn as something new. Part museum, part educational center, part home. The East Wing housed the Foundation's offices and a small gallery for rotating exhibits. The main structure held both private family quarters and public spaces for scholars and visitors. On a spring morning in 2026, Margot stood in the entrance hall at dawn, watching sunlight illuminate the restored wooden panels and freshly cleaned stone carvings. In these quiet moments, she could almost feel the weight of history, not as burden, but as foundation. Something solid upon which to build a future worthy of those who had come before. What had begun as an inheritance she never wanted had become a mission she couldn't imagine abandoning. Castellano Estate wasn't just a home or a historical curiosity. It was living testimony to one man's refusal to surrender beauty and truth to those who would destroy both. Jasper found her there bringing coffee, his arm sliding around her shoulders with familiar comfort. First time I saw this place, it was falling apart. Roof leaking, windows, broken trees growing through the floors in some spots. Thought Theodore was crazy for buying it, even crazier for keeping it all those years without living in it. And now I understand what he saw. What Victor saw when he brought it across an ocean stone by stone. Some places aren't just buildings. They're anchors for what matters. Memory, beauty, truth. Things that last beyond one lifetime. The compass rose on the brass key caught morning light in Margot's pocket, its cardinal points gleaming. North, south, east, west. Directions home. Directions toward justice. Directions toward a future Margot could never have imagined when all she had was $23 and an eviction notice. Outside, birds began their morning songs in the trees surrounding Castellano estate. Inside, Margot held the key that had unlocked more than doors, understanding finally that the greatest inheritance wasn't measured in dollars or square footage. It was purpose that transcended a single lifetime, the knowledge that some things were worth protecting at any cost, and the courage to choose justice over fortune when the moment demanded it. Not all treasures are made of paint and canvas, Jasper observed quietly. Some are built of stone and sacrifice. Some are written in blood and bone. Margot nodded, understanding completely. Legacy wasn't just what you inherited. It was what you chose to defend, what you committed to preserve for those who would come after. And sometimes it was knowing when to let go, when to return what was never truly yours, when to trust that doing right mattered more than holding tight. The castle stood strong against the spring sky, no longer abandoned, no longer a folly. It was home. And in the foundation's gallery, Victor's amateur landscape hung in simple honor. His words as true now as when he'd written them nearly a century before: for the Castellano who finds this, you were worth waiting for.